Thank you everyone for joining us today. I first wanted to acknowledge that we are holding this press conference on the unceded and stolen territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations, who remain the stewards of these lands to this day. My name is Stefania Seicha, and I'm the Executive Director of the Women's National Housing and Homelessness Network. 3 years ago, we stood in front of Parliament with nothing but a microphone and 2 human rights claims. We compiled irrefutable evidence and said plainly what governments had ignored for decades, that women, two-spirit, trans, and gender-diverse people are facing a national human rights crisis in housing. And we demanded that Canada uphold its legal duty to ensure the right to housing for us. Those claims, filed in 2022 by the National Indigenous Women's Housing Network and the Women's National Housing and Homelessness Network, triggered the very response that brings us here today. In 2019, Canada passed the National Housing Strategy Act, which finally recognized housing as a human right. Under that law, when a National Housing Council Review Panel completes its work, the Federal Housing Minister must respond within 120 days publicly in the House and Senate, and that response must be meaningful. After we filed our claims, the Federal Housing Advocate investigated and declared the situation for marginalized women and gender-diverse people a national human rights crisis. In May 2023, the Advocate referred the issue to the National Housing Council for review, and in September 2024, the Council appointed the 3-member Neha Review Panel to examine Canada's duty to uphold this right. Over the last year, we have mobilized and heard from over 500 women, two-spirit, trans, and gender-diverse people and organizations on how Canada has fallen short and not met the right to housing for this population. In 120 days, when we see Minister Robertson's response, we're expecting a meaningful one. That means commitment, funding, benchmarks, goals. If their investment, if federal government's investment in the right to housing, in housing, is going to be meaningful and not leave those of us who need housing out in the cold, then it needs to meet us where we're at. It needs to ensure that the investments that they're making are bringing in the right folks who have been left out for far too long. Thank you.
Ani bonjour Wachier. My name is Gregor Pipan Kutbijnakas. We Quem Kum Donjaba. Dogan Kwendao. I serve as chair to the National Indigenous Women's Housing Network. 3 years ago, we stood on Indigenous lands, rooted in our knowledge, and raised a claim unlike any before it. With the Homeless on Homelands claim, we declared, the housing crisis affecting Indigenous women, girls, two-spirit, and gender-diverse people is not incidental. It is deeply tied to colonial dispossession, gendered violence, and systemic neglect. Our claim documented 4 key violations. Lack of action on the calls for justice from the final report of the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls, and the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada calls to action. Failure to provide safe, adequate, culturally appropriate housing on our own terms. Interjurisdictional neglect, multiple system failures, institutional betrayal. Insecure tenure, both under the National Housing Strategy Act and in Indigenous land systems. Over the past year, our lived expert leaders, grassroots partners, and frontline organizations have stepped forward, sharing testimony, lifting our voices, mapping the real harms, compiling evidence across urban, rural, remote, and reserve settings. Our voices have been heard. We will not accept half measures. We will not accept housing solutions that come without culture, community, and rights. Our message to government is clear. Recognize housing for Indigenous women, girls, two-spirit, and gender-diverse people, not as an add-on, but as central to reconciliation, to safety, and to justice. Support Indigenous governed housing solutions rooted in our knowledge, culture, and land, and ensure that funding, policy, and programs reflect the urgency of our crisis. Commit to accountability, meaningful monitoring, intersectional data gathering, permanent core funding, and decision-making that honors our leadership and self-determination. When Canada's federal housing minister responds, we hope to see the right to housing honored. The response must reflect a real commitment with timelines, measures, and funding allocations, guided by our experiences and human rights. Nisa Iwech, Marie McGregor, Pitawanakot.
Good morning. My name is John Gordon. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of the National Indigenous Collaborative Housing Inc. We're here in Vancouver holding our capacity event, and we're very proud to have the folks here today to do the press release and issue the report. And we're interested in looking at what's in the report, and the National Indigenous Collaborative Housing Inc. is really about working with communities, partners in collaboration across all sectors, and bringing community-led solutions for housing to bear to these types of issues. So we welcome the report. We thank you for the efforts you put forth in bringing this to the forefront. We look forward to the minister's response and being supportive in any way we can. Thank you.
To learn to sit gently. I didn't want to go for a fly here. Doyaksit Nun, John, and Doyaksit Nissim, everyone. Amagan Flak, Margaret Fo, Diwayu, Gispudwada, Dikregu, Nelth Beaton Zepka, Gispudwada, Simsianu, Lakwalams, Ada, Gitnangik, Diwawaku. My name is Margaret Fo, and the killer whale is my clan. The blackfish is the crest for the killer whale, and I am Simsian. I'm a member of the Lakwa Lambs Band and descended from the Gitnangik tribe people of the Hemlock. I'm here today as the CEO for the Aboriginal Housing Management Association, also known as AMA. I want to begin by just saying Doyaksit Nusum, thank you all for being here. And in particular, a big Doyaksit Nun thank you to the Women's Housing and Homelessness Network for bringing us all together and allowing us this time to share in this critical moment in the National Housing Council's review of Canada's duty to uphold the right to housing. The release of the Neha Panel's findings aligns both with the beginning of the International 16 Days of Activism Against Gender-Based Violence and, not surprisingly, the release of AMA's Gender-Based Violence Indigenous Housing Strategy for British Columbia. We've brought a copy for everyone should you be interested in looking at that. Our strategy estimates that right at this particular minute, nearly 13,000 Indigenous women-led households in BC alone need access to a diverse range of safe, supportive, and culturally grounded housing. Our strategy responds to the multiple calls for justice identified in the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls. The National Inquiry calls for all levels of government to begin construction on new, culturally appropriate housing and repair existing homes. Governments need to work together. They need to support and equitably sustain Indigenous-led low-barrier shelters, safe spaces, transition-led housing, second-stage housing, and related supportive services for Indigenous women, girls, and 2S LGBTQ+ people in British Columbia and across Canada. We have been told what safety means, and it starts with home. For those experiencing homelessness or fleeing violence, exploitation, or poverty, a safe home is the first and most critical requirement. More than 60% of all GBV survivors experience housing instability. Together, the NEHA reports and AMA strategy demonstrates that Canada is not meeting its obligations. Housing and related services are a human right that must be well supported and available wherever needed to provide long-term stability. And right now, we have an incredible opportunity to rise together. As we all know, purple is a visible way to say, we see you, we believe you, and we are not looking away. For Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirited people, we wear red and a red dress. The red dress symbols are reminders of the ongoing crisis as reported in the MMID-WG reports. And I'd like to quote our former MLA, Padden, Parliamentary Secretary here in British Columbia. She said that this standing together is important because gender-based violence isn't private. It's not complicated. It's not inevitable. It's preventable, and it's on all of us to challenge the attitudes, the systems, and the silence that makes it possible. Women should not need to choose between violence and homelessness. Protecting women starts with upholding the right to housing. Dayaxit Nissim, everyone. Thank you.
Good day, everyone. We at the BC Poverty Reduction Coalition are honored to be joining our fellow advocates in calling for housing justice for women and gender diverse peoples. Poverty and gender-based violence are tragically interconnected with economic freedom to access safe and stable housing options often being the only way to leave abuse. The lack of housing for people fleeing violence is a systemic failure. But this failure can be mitigated by providing units that are relevant to need, with housing policy at every level considering the needs of women and families experiencing domestic and intimate partner violence, street-based homelessness, women-run households, and precarious or underhoused women or gender-diverse people. No level of government can commit to ending violence against women and gender-diverse people without reckoning with how they are part of committing that violence and their failure to prevent and eliminate homelessness. Due to a lack of housing across the spectrum of need, from emergency shelters to second stage housing to culturally safe and appropriate housing, many survivors are faced with the choice of staying in violent homes, or the violence of being unhoused. Reinvesting in Canada's social housing across the housing spectrum is vital for addressing the housing crisis and its dire impact on women and gender diverse people. We are calling not just for status quo investments, but a rigorous intervention to quell the tides of the financialization of housing. At a time when all levels of government are putting forward budgets aimed at nation building, funded by austerity for vital social programs, we call for a recognition and investment in people, especially women and gender diverse people, as a vital part of that nation. The federal government has been offered clear, intersectional, and evidence-based pathways forward in the over 100 submissions made to the Neha panel. It is time to literally build these recommendations toward housing policy that ensures safety and well-being in Canada.
Hello everyone, my name is Emily Coyle. I work as the co-executive director of the Canadian Association of Elizabeth Fry Societies. And as I begin, I wanted to say how proud I am to be here alongside so many powerful organizations and community leaders who are doing extraordinary work every day to advance the right to housing and challenge criminalization. The Neha Review Panel process has shown what is possible when institutions lean into the value of lifting up everyone and leaving no one behind in their search for answers and solutions, especially when centering the expertise of women, Two-Spirit, trans, and gender diverse people with lived experience of homelessness and criminalization. We work alongside criminalized women and gender diverse people, and we welcome the Neha Review's panel decision to center their voices, including the voices of those who are living in prisons. In June of this year, we went into the prisons and jails in Nova Scotia, and we strongly believe that meaningful change is not possible without directly including the voices of those most affected by failures in housing, social support, and justice systems. The link between criminalization and a lack of housing is not experienced equally As you've already heard today, it falls hardest on Indigenous women and gender diverse people, who now make up more than half of those in federal prisons designated for women, comprising less than 5% of our population, and in some provincial and territorial jails and in youth custody in parts of the prairies, Indigenous women and girls make up the vast majority of those behind bars, sometimes upwards to 75 or 90% of the people inside, making it painfully clear to everyone that what is being called a housing or justice issue is also a continuation of colonial dispossession and systemic racism. From our perspective, one of the most critical pieces of the work done to get us today, as I've already mentioned, was the inclusion of the voices of those who experience systems that contribute to ongoing harm. We hope that by embedding people with lived experience of criminalization, including those who are currently and formerly incarcerated, as decision makers in housing policy design and funding allocation and accountability structures, the projects that will be co-designed and governed by those people who experiences those systems will be recognizing their expertise in defining what safety, support, and justice look like. And so to end, when governments choose punishment over support, they deepen homelessness, poverty, and violence. And when they invest instead in rights-based housing and community-led solutions, they create real safety and dignity. The Neha Review Panel offers a roadmap here, and we look forward to Minister Robertson and Canada acting on that roadmap. Thank you very much.
Good morning. My name is DJ Larkin. I'm the Executive Director with the Canadian Drug Policy Coalition, and I'm really honored that we get to be here with all these amazing organizations. We're not a housing group. We are here because our health crises and our housing crises are deeply interconnected, and this review panel provides an incredible pathway forward that identifies the intersection of the social, health, economic, gender, Indigenous, and racial justice issues that we are facing. Not only does this review take into account the complexity of our identities, because we are all that we are born with, all that we experience, and we are also impacted by the policy systems that shape our lives every day. So this panel really took that into consideration and grappled with that complexity. And the recommendations are not only about housing, they are about how to create a community of care, from services that reduce harm right now in community-based care, all the way to those supports that help create wellness throughout a lifetime. And the report calls on us to reconsider how we are funding institutional systems and carceral systems in ways that are creating homelessness, instability, unwellness, and taking money away from the housing that we need. From our perspective as a drug policy group, we see not only the issues as being connected, but also the solutions. We are experiencing diverse social, economic, cultural injustices, and this report is one of those pathways and one of those roadmaps forward that we hope the Minister Robertson and others will take seriously and implement to the fullest degree and in accordance with human rights standards as they are being called upon to do.
Hello, my name is Michelle Biss, and I'm the Executive Director of the National Right to Housing Network. These recommendations from the review panel of NEHA come in an opportune moment. We've heard Prime Minister Mark Carney say that housing is a priority for this federal government, we've seen a commitment to affordable housing now and Build Canada Homes. But at the same moment, we're also seeing deeply regressive policy actions across the country. For example, just yesterday in my home province of Ontario, we saw the passing of Bill 60, a bill that incentivizes rent eviction and expedites the eviction process for folks who are low income. The bill was passed at a time when so many people are struggling and homelessness is rising. This report from NEHA is a reminder that Canada's recognition of the right to adequate housing establishes a clear legal standard. In 2019, we got legislation, and that comes with real legal obligations that are rooted in justice. It goes beyond words on paper. We are talking here about a legal obligation that the Government of Canada holds. We at the National Right to Housing Network are confident that Housing Minister Gregor Robertson will engage seriously and in good faith with the recommendations from Neha to uphold Canada's human rights commitments. We are hopeful that this means that he will, in the coming months, embed human rights recommendations in the rollout of programs like Build Canada Homes and in any other housing policies, laws, or programs. The testimony and solutions that were put forward by women and gender diverse persons, it's not optional input. It's expertise, it's lived expertise that must have a real impact on federal housing policy. The review panel process that came out of the federal government's very own National Housing Strategy Act. It exists to ensure the voices of rights holders are finally taken seriously, and we look forward to working with the Housing Minister to make sure that those words do go beyond paper.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for inviting me today. My name is Amy Fitzgerald. I'm the Executive Director of the BC Society of Transition Houses. I'm a longstanding board director of Women's Shelters Canada, which I am here representing today. And thank you very much for the Women's National Housing and Homeless Network for bringing us all together on this momentous day. Women's Shelters Canada is a network that brings together 16 provincial and territorial associations, including the BC Society of Transition Houses that I have the honor and privilege of working alongside. They support over 600 shelters across the country for women, all women, self-identified women, and children fleeing violence. Women's Shelters Canada and the BC Society of Transition Houses were both honored to be included in the Neha Review process, and the consultations were innovative, responsive, and inclusive. This thoughtful process is a roadmap for ongoing engagements on housing and other topics that we would like to see repeated by the federal government. We jointly look forward to the federal government's response to this thorough report, and we are delighted to see specific recommendations such as the recognition that the lack of long-term safe and affordable housing across Canada is disproportionately impacting all women and their families and forcing them to trade safety for housing, and is a violation of their fundamental human rights. A deep investment in long-term affordable accessible housing is recognized in the report to address this critical need, as emergency shelters were never meant to be a place to live long-term and often are at or over capacity across Canada. And also, we are delighted to see the finding that the national occupancy standards are not an accurate measure for housing suitability and are in fact a significant barrier and a pretext for discriminating against women and their families, and in particular, larger families. There is a need to reform the national occupancy standards to reflect safety and diverse housing needs of Canadian women and their families fleeing violence. The federal government, through their Build Canada Homes, is ideally placed to continue dedicating 25% of funding to housing for women-led households in recognition of these critical needs, as they noted under the National Housing Strategy. There is a desperate need for more long-term, transitional, and supportive housing for survivors of gender-based violence, and we recommend a dedicated funding stream within Build Canada Homes. Previously, when this was included in the Rapid Housing Initiative at CMHC, it was oversubscribed by more than 500%. Gender-based violence remains the primary cause of women's homelessness in BC and Canada. Long-term safe housing is critical for survivors and their family to live lives free from violence, and we look forward to the government recognizing and resourcing this pathway to safety and dignity. And we're grateful for the collaboration of my colleagues in the room. So thank you.
Okay, I'm the last speaker, so I will keep this as short as possible. Hello, my name is Shauna Short. I am the Senior Manager of Advocacy at YWCA Metro Vancouver. I'm here today on behalf of the YWCA movement, representing Canada's largest and oldest gender justice organization. As you have heard from other presenters today, housing is a critical issue that underpins economic security and safety for women. Rising costs, limited supply, and systemic inequities mean many women, especially single mothers, seniors, newcomers, and Indigenous women, are at heightened risk of housing insecurity and homelessness. For women fleeing violence, the situation is even more urgent. Shelters, transition houses, and second stage houses are often full, forcing women to choose between violence or homelessness. Here in Vancouver, where this event is being held, YWCA Metro Vancouver provides safe, stable homes for over 800 women and children, many developed in partnership with all levels of government. These partnerships show what's possible when we work together, but the need is growing. In 2024, there were well over 1,000 families that applied to be on our housing wait list. That's a 30% increase since 2022. And 70% of these mostly single mother-led families, they need deeply affordable rents. That's why we have been laser focused on increasing our housing portfolio for homes for women and children in BC. We're thrilled to be opening 214 new units across Burnaby, Vancouver, and Langley in the coming months. Most of these units will be prioritized for survivors of violence who are precariously underhoused, face ongoing safety risks, and are caught in the affordability crisis. These units are life-changing, and when accompanied by YWCA's wraparound supports, we see incredible long-term impacts for single moms and their kids. As shared by YWCA Canada at our Neha Review submission, we need to prioritize safe, affordable, and accessible housing options for women across the housing continuum. These investments are not only life-changing for women, they strengthen families, they strengthen our communities, and they strengthen our economy. YWCA Metro Vancouver and across the YWCA Metro Vancouver and across the YWCA movement, we are grateful for the tireless advocacy of so many in this room, and we welcome the release of the Neha Review Panel report. We look forward to hearing the federal government's response, and we remain ready to implement transformative housing solutions for women and families. Thank you.
I just want to say a huge thank you to everyone who has joined us here today. We chose to have this gathering and this call to action in the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh in the city of Vancouver, where our current Housing and Infrastructure Minister was first voted in as mayor on the promise to end homelessness. Now we are hoping he will fulfill that promise for women, two-spirit, trans, and gender-diverse people. The 120-day countdown is now underway. Women and gender-diverse people have done the work. Lived experts have shown the way. Now the federal government must act. Thank you so much.